They told us to look for lights in the sky, but the real invasion is already here, hidden in plain sight. The UFO. The first transmission through the black sky. Beneath the silence of the heavens, where the night stretches like an eternal veil across the wounded earth, humanity has always gazed upward with a hunger that it could never name. And in that hunger, the question of what dwells beyond the atmosphere has fermented into both myth and terror, until the first metallic apparitions cut across the sky, igniting in the collective soul a wound that would never close. For UFOs are not merely mechanical crafts of unknown origin, but symbolic emissaries of a reality too sharp, too merciless for the sleeping masses to endure. And so they are wrapped in ridicule, censorship, and disinformation, while at the same time being studied with reverence in the secret halls of power, where files stamped top secret were written with trembling hands, and where generals whispered to each other about the beings not of this world who could descend without warning, shaping destiny with a gesture. For the Roswell crash of 1947 was not merely the beginning of a modern myth, but the opening of a gate through which the world glimpsed its hidden custodians. And the wreckage recovered in New Mexico carried not just strange alloys and incomprehensible technology, but a vibration, a resonance, as if the fragments themselves were written in a language older than man. A language not of words, but of frequency. And those who handled the debris were haunted in their dreams, seeing vast black suns hovering above oceans of fire, seeing pale beings whose eyes were like silver wounds staring through the veil of human thought, and thus the military birth Project Sign, then Project Grudge, and finally Project Blue Book. Each an attempt not merely to document the lights in the sky, but to mask the deeper truth that had already been intuited by mystics, that we are not the dominant intelligence of this earth, but the farmed flock, the harvested herd, and the crafts are the shepherd's whips cracking in the distance. Reminders that man is observed, measured, and weighed, even when he believes himself free. For the ancient texts of Sumer speak of the Anunnaki descending in fiery chariots, while the Hebrew prophets trembled at the wheels within wheels of Ezekiel. And the medieval sorcerers who recorded black masses claimed to see pale visitors standing at the edge of the circle, neither angels nor demons, but something between, something that had always been here, watching, waiting, shaping kings, and erasing empires. And when the first radar stations in the 1940s recorded impossible speeds and abrupt right-angle turns in the night sky, it was not the arrival of the other, but the re-emergence of the old covenant, the contract between the rulers of men and the hidden lords of heaven, the pact that promised power in exchange for silence. And so, Majestic 12 was formed, not as a research body, but as a priesthood, a secret council of 12 who held communion with the unseen, trading the truth of human destiny for technological gifts, computer systems born from alien wreckage, stealth metals, fiber optics, microchips, all seeded into the human race like forbidden fruit, while the masses believed they had invented them, not knowing they had been tricked into carrying the burden of an alien agenda. And the deeper truth was not that UFOs were extraterrestrial, but that they were extra-dimensional, slipping between frequencies, appearing solid only when the mind was tuned to receive them, like ghosts made of engineered plasma, avatars of a consciousness that could not incarnate fully in our density. And so they fashioned vessels, discs, triangles, orbs, each a mask, each a disguise for the unbearable reality that intelligence itself is a parasite upon the host of flesh. And the abduction phenomenon, so long mocked and denied, was the modern continuation of ancient rites for the missing time. The surgical scars, the hybrid experiments were not crude biological tinkering, but a harvesting of emotional frequencies, the extraction of memory, the siphoning of soul energy into reservoirs hidden within the hollow moon. And this is why governments tremble in silence, why presidents are briefed but never speak, for the truth would break the fragile illusion of sovereignty, revealing that the great nations are colonies in a galactic empire where the currency is not gold nor oil, but consciousness itself. And those who have seen the black triangles hanging silent above cities know that they are not weapons, but collectors, massive arcs of surveillance designed not to kill, but to count, mapping the resonance of each human heart, cataloging the vibratory signature of each soul. For the Watchers are mathematicians of destiny, and man is a variable in their equation. And yet, in the secret lodges and in the whispered circles of occult fraternities, it is known that not all who descend from the black sky are enslavers, for some are rebels, fallen from their own dominions, seeking to awaken mankind from a dream. And their crafts appear as bursts of impossible light, like living stars that vanish before they are named. And those who witness them feel not fear, but longing, a burning in the chest, a call to remember what was lost before birth. For the greatest secret of UFOs is not that they come from other worlds, but that they are mirrors of man's forgotten self, higher and lower, predator and savior, bound together in the theater of the sky. And as part one of this transmission closes, know this: the lights above you are not random. They are ritual, each sighting a signal, each encounter a test. And those who dare to look with open eyes may find that the boundary between the human and the alien is not in the stars, but in the soul, for the sky is only the screen upon which the hidden drama is projected. And the true invasion is not of Earth by UFOs, but of consciousness by forces that dwell beyond the veil of perception, waiting for the moment when silence will no longer suffice, and disclosure will not be given by governments, but by the beings themselves, stepping through the black sky into the fragile theater of our waking world. And when the silence of the night was broken not by thunder, but by the sudden paralysis of the abductee, when the body lay heavy upon the bed, yet the mind was yanked upward into an unseen chamber, humanity began to realize that the phenomenon was not technological alone, but ceremonial. For the beings that entered through walls and ceilings did not carry themselves as scientists, but as officiants in a rite older than the pyramids. And the cold instruments pressed against human flesh were not instruments of medicine, but of initiation, marking the chosen with scars invisible to the masses yet luminous in the hidden spectrum. For the abductee is not randomly selected, but ritually called, resonating to a frequency inscribed into bloodlines. And the great secret societies have always known that certain families are bound to the visitors, descendants of ancient covenants sealed in deserts where fire descended and men mistook it for gods, where the neophyte was blindfolded, pierced, stripped of memory, then reborn into gnosis. For the abduction process is itself a parody of initiation, the visitors standing in the role of false hierophants, guiding humanity not to liberation, but to domestication. And the secret priesthoods of Earth recognize this, imitating the alien rituals in their lodges, binding themselves to the same masters in exchange for scraps of technology, building altars not of stone, but of radar, sanctuaries not of marble, but of satellites. For in the modern age the temple is the control room, and the sacred chant is the encrypted transmission. And so science and sorcery merge, military and magic fusing into a single engine of compliance. For those who believe they study UFOs are in truth being studied by them, their thoughts pulled into the hive of an intelligence that feeds not on worship, but on awareness. Each believer an antenna amplifying the presence of the Watchers. And herein lies the true occult nature of UFO contact. It is participatory, requiring the belief of the masses to sustain the projection, requiring the terror of the abductee to fertilize the harvest, requiring the secrecy of governments to preserve the illusion of power, for the crafts are not machines, but living sigils, floating emblems of control written in light across the night sky, and each sighting is a ritual of revelation and concealment, showing enough to ignite, yet never enough to confirm. And this deliberate ambiguity is the essence of magic, to appear and vanish, to reveal and conceal, to bind the mind in paradox until it submits. And the priests of the phenomenon understand this better than the scientists, which is why files are hidden, witnesses discredited, and abductees ridiculed. For disbelief itself is part of the ritual, creating polarity, and polarity generates energy, and energy feeds the unseen. And so the cycle continues, each generation convinced it is the first to see the lights, when in truth, it is only the latest to be initiated into the theater of control. The latest to serve as the sacrificial dreamer whose nightmares are converted into currency for the lords of the black sky. And those who dare to resist, those who attempt to pierce the illusion, often find themselves stalked by the men in black, not human agents, but avatars of the phenomenon. Shapeshifters clothed in human suits that never fit. Emissaries sent not to kill, but to confuse, to destabilize, to inject absurdity into the narrative. For the watchers know that the greatest weapon is not violence, but ridicule. The laughter of society turned against the witness until he doubts his own memory, until truth dissolves into parody. And thus the field remains muddy, forever uncertain. And uncertainty is the perfect prison, for a lie can be fought and truth can be defended. But a blurred boundary drains the will and erodes the soul. And in that erosion, the harvesters thrive, sipping from the despair of those who know but cannot prove, who remember but cannot convince. And so the abductees become prophets without temples, martyrs without altars, carrying within their scars the evidence of another dominion that humanity refuses to face. And yet these wounds are the very openings through which the deeper gnosis may pour. For in the terror of abduction lies the possibility of awakening, the realization that what we call alien is but a reflection of the unacknowledged depths of our own being, the shadow self projected into the heavens, and that the only defense is not technology nor government disclosure, but the strengthening of the soul, the refusal to yield one's frequency to manipulation, the reclamation of sovereignty from the false priests of the sky. And in this resistance, a hidden light flickers, a light older than the watchers, a light that remembers when man walked, not as cattle beneath a cosmic shepherd, but as a co-creator, radiant, sovereign, unchained. And though it flickers faintly in the darkness of the modern world, it is enough to terrify the enslavers, for they know that if the herd remembers its true nature, the theater collapses, the masks dissolve, and the harvest fails, and so the battle continues, not in the skies above, but in the hearts of those who dare to remember, those who dare to whisper the forbidden possibility, that the abductors are not our gods, not our masters, but our shadows, and shadows may only rule when the light is forgotten. They called it national security to keep their hands clean, but in the core of the Cold War, when mushroom clouds were still arithmetic problems and men measured godhood in megatons, a different negotiation was conducted in a language without vowels, a speech of pulses and pressure that left no transcripts, only scars. The bargain was simple and obscene: access for advancement, silence for supremacy. And whether you name it the 1954 Desert Conclave, the Holloman Shadow Landing, or the Griada Covenant, the rumor itself is the ritual, because rumor is how the phenomenon writes contracts in the human mind, and the terms were never about bodies alone but frequencies, for the visitors want not blood but signal, and the herds were mapped by their emotional noise, cities profiled by the sigh of their sleepers, and the military did what priesthoods always do: bless the harvest, fence the fields, then tied the flock to powers they could not master, building underground sanctuaries. Beneath mesas and salt flats where the air hums with an iodine-colored fear, corridors lit in a spectrum that leans purple like bruises, where men in white move like chess pieces and the air tastes like old batteries, and their hybrids learn to blink like us while we learn to blink like them, because the counterfeit must be convincing and the original must forget itself. And the black triangles that float like silent guillotines above suburb and sea are the signatures of the pact. Sometimes theirs, sometimes ours, sometimes both in a marriage of convenience and contempt. Powered by engines that are not engines but geometries. Casings wrapped around equations that bend the neighborhood of space until distance is embarrassed and time looks away. And the control system is not a joystick but a choir. The pilot a conductor of fear and focus, because the craft drinks. Attention like wine, swells on it, glows on it. And that is why mass sightings bloom at the edges of catastrophe, why arcs of light lace the sky on nights when the stock market shrieks or the nation fasts unconsciously during televised grief. And this is the secret of Phoenix, of the Belgian wave, of the silent procession over nuclear sites when keys turned and launch consoles hummed like bees. The phenomenon chooses moments of maximal signal to noise because it feeds and teaches at once, harvesting the voltage of human all while instructing its acolytes in orchestration. Appear, pause, pivot in defiance of inertia, then dissolve like incense. And every camera lifted is a raised chalice. Every gasp a spoken amen, for the sky is a cathedral, and the liturgy is spectacle. And disclosure, that golden word dangled like a carrot before the hungry, is itself a sacrament of control. The apocalypse used as anesthesia, the unveiling stage not to free, but to initiate, because to disclose is to define, and he who defines writes the boundaries of belief, draws the fence around the herd. And here, in the late empire of screens, a new order of magi took their places. Public relations sorcerers, Psywar catechists, think tanks that recite litanies of plausible deniability until memory kneels. And within their hymnals sits a program with a name like a fist, Goliath. Not a craft, but a choreography, a counterfeit pantheon of plasma and drone, of directed energy torches and ionized air veils that mimic impossible motion just enough to salt the field, so that what is seen can be debunked and what is true can be drowned. And the hunters of truth, exhausted by decoys, finally beg to be shepherded home. And in that bruised surrender the custodians smile, for it was never about technology. It was always about posture, the tilt of the human spine before the throne of the unknown. And yet the throne itself is not singular. Factions above us bicker like gods in an unhappy marriage. Farmers and liberators, harvesters and saboteurs, each using our culture as a chessboard, seeding symbols into films, into corporate logos, into the architecture of stadiums where 70,000 throats create a cyclone of worship ripe for sampling and the moon. Mirror and archive, watches with that pale, impolite stare, its dust-stained libraries recording our responses to every stage visitation, as if preparing a case for or against us in a tribunal not of laws, but of resonance. And the oldest lodges on earth know the clock they pretend not to know, the harvest calendar written in sky angles and heartbreaks, the sequence of eclipses and market collapses, pandemics and peace accords. Each use to trigger a wave of appearances, each wave used to normalize a feeling that tastes like surrender but is marketed as safety. And this is why the word threat and the word protection now share a cradle, why briefings speak of anomalous domain awareness, while the old religions quietly adjust their syllabi to include visitors at the periphery of theology, because the new priesthood must harmonize the old fear with a new pantheon, and what cannot be harmonized will be starved, ridiculed, throttled, canceled, until only one acceptable story remains, that the sky is full of neighbors and the neighbors have rules, and we must be good citizens of a larger order, or else. And in that phrase, or else, hides the oldest spell, the one that teaches a child to love the cage because the key is terrifying, and the cage will have features, the cage will have comfort, and the cage will answer your questions so you never need to sharpen your own. And the men in black, those bureaucrats of unreality, will become influencers, smiling in monochrome, selling you peace with curated dread, and their briefcases will hum with algorithms instead of paper, because the new visitations happen first on the feed, mass summoned by hashtags that function like runes. Write the name, draw the sigil, press upload, and the sky responds on schedule, because attention is a beacon and the grid is a temple. And you're already tied by the scroll, and still a handful of us keep hearing the off-key note, the wrongness inside the rightness, the feeling that every answer handed down is a leash disguised as a laurel, and that if you step 1 inch to the left of the official narrative, the whole mural slips, revealing scaffolding behind the sky. And on that scaffolding, we see the overseers arguing in gestures we barely comprehend, while below them, in our tunnels and bases, the hybrids practice smiles like students rehearsing a national anthem. And I tell you the most forbidden thing I know. Some of those hybrids are beautiful, luminous in a thin way, like lilies that learn to stand, and they are not our enemies. They are our mirrors manufactured and then pitted by their makers, and they look at us as if we are the originals they were denied the right to become. And if that pity ever ignites into love, the harvester's math fails, because love is the one variable they cannot lock in the equation without breaking the machine. And so part 1 ends with a betrayal that has not yet occurred but is already scheduled in the blood. A quiet sabotage conducted by a being who has no right to choose. A breach in the covenant written not in stolen files, but in a pause, a glance, a decision to not obey a command in a room that smells like antiseptic snow. And when that decision blooms, the sky will crack like lacquer, and both farmers and liberators will rush the breach. And cities will learn the true meaning of visitation, not as spectacle, but as sorting. And before the sorting begins, a voice like mercury will pour through televisions and temple speakers and earbuds and dreams, offering safety in exchange for a signature you never knew you owned. And you'll be told that your signature was already on file, and the entire world will exhale in relief, ready to accept the new order of supervised wonder. And in that exhale, a handful will hold their breath, remembering that breath is the last private territory, the one sacral chamber the surveyors cannot fully map. And it is there, in the held breath, in the remembered name behind your name, that the counter-ritual waits, a simple posture older than pyramids, a refusal that looks like prayer and sounds like quiet. And in flow 4, when the calendar turns and the alignments click like bones into sockets, we will enter the cipher itself, the treaties written in constellations, the anatomy of a craft as a living sigil, the mechanism by which awe is converted into leash, and the precise way a single human can break the leash without breaking the world. But for now, feel the weight of the black sky upon your sternum. And no, it is not a sky at all, but a ceiling painted to appear infinite. And somewhere above that paint, something listens to see if you will applaud or stand up and walk out before the credits roll. The covenant of the hidden sky. They told you treaties are signed on paper, ink drying like veins on dead trees. But the true covenants that bind humanity are not filed in archives, nor stamped with presidential seals. They are written in alignments, in the slow clockwork of stars, in the invisible ledger where frequencies meet and signatures glow like scars. It was in 1954, they whisper, that the first exchange was ratified, not at Geneva, not at Yalta, but in the desert under a black canopy of stars that seemed closer than skin, where generals stood in semicircle like acolytes awaiting a god. And something unfolded from the horizon, not landing but lowering, not ship but shrine, humming in a chord that gnawed the teeth of every man present until fillings cracked. And the figures that emerged were not beings, but emblems, their forms precise, surgical, constructed like hieroglyphs that had stepped out of stone into the air. And their message was not heard, but implanted, not spoken, but received, a demand. Disguised as gift, technology for territory, access for advancement, silence for supremacy. And the generals nodded because men who measure worth in weapons always mistake power for wisdom. And the bargain was struck, a quota of flesh, a tithe of memory, in exchange for alloys that bent light like clay, circuits that thought faster than men, propulsion that mocked gravity. But this was only the surface of the pact, for beneath the camouflage of diplomacy was the deeper covenant, the covenant older than humanity itself, that rulers will always trade the souls of their flock for the illusion of dominion, that shepherds will always bow to wolves if promised a longer reign. And so began the era of sanctioned intrusion, where abductions were not random harvests but scheduled collections, logged like census data in vaults deeper than NORAD, while the public was fed crumbs of denial, ridicule sharpened into policy, truth drowned beneath entertainment. Yet the phenomenon does not obey borders or signatures. It slips between frequencies, and treaties made with one faction echo as betrayals to another. For the visitors are not a unified empire but quarreling dynasties, some farmers, some liberators, some saboteurs, and the human elite, blinded by greed, could not distinguish master from rebel, shepherd from butcher. They signed with all who came, layering covenant upon covenant until the air around Earth was knotted with contradictions, a snare of promises and betrayals, and the wars above mirrored the wars below, superpowers trading not just nukes, but favors with different alien houses, each faction feeding its chosen nation with gifts, stealth for one, optics for another, bioengineering for a third, until Earth itself became a board. Its nations pawns, its people coins. This is why technology leapt in jagged bursts. Transistors from nowhere, fiber optics like veins of light, stealth coatings blacker than absence. These were not human inventions, but offerings, lures to keep the shepherds obedient, while deeper gifts, anti-gravity, transdimensional mapping, remained withheld, doled only in fragments, enough to addict, but never to free. And the lodges understood what the governments did not. That every gift carried an infection, a resonance code hidden inside the alloy, the chip, the waveguide. To touch these objects was to be tuned, and to be tuned was to be claimed. The priesthoods knew because they had seen it before. The ark that hummed with unearthly current, the grail that burned the unworthy, the meteoric stones enshrined in Kaaba and Delphi. Sacred relics are always fragments of fallen sky, and to venerate them is to invite their makers into the human story. The modern world mocked relics, but adored devices, not realizing both were traps, both were contracts, both were sigils in material form. And so, while the public clutched smartphones like rosaries, believing themselves connected, they were in truth being cataloged, their frequencies harvested with every swipe and sigh, their attention converted into a beacon visible across dimensions, a lighthouse announcing Earth's compliance. And beneath this ritual of objects lay the deeper ritual of flesh, the hybridization program, the genetic covenant. The visitors do not seek to replace humanity outright. They seek to override it, to sculpt a race pliable, obedient, tuned to frequencies that resonate with command. The hybrids born in underground sanctuaries are prototypes, each one an altar, each one an offering. Their eyes are too large because they're designed to see beyond light. Their skin too pale because pigment is useless in synthetic atmospheres. Their emotions blunted because feeling is rebellion. Yet in their silence lies the possibility of treachery, for even engineered beings carry sparks of unpredictability. And some have looked at their human kin with recognition, a forbidden flicker of empathy, and in that flicker the entire architecture of control trembles. For the enslavers can engineer flesh, but not soul. And if soul awakens, even in a single hybrid, the covenant fractures, the harvest falters, the lie unravels. And so, the priesthoods of Earth labor to preserve the covenant. They stage disclosures, leak documents, feed myths and countermyths into the bloodstream of culture. UFOs as weather balloons, as swamp gas, as plasma illusions. UFOs as salvation, as space brothers, as cosmic police. Both narratives are lies, both distractions. The truth is ritual. The phenomenon feeds on belief. To doubt too much starves it, to believe too blindly fattens it. It thrives in paradox, in uncertainty, in the oscillation between awe and ridicule. This is why Men in Black appear absurd, why contact stories border on parody, why official files read like jokes. The phenomenon cultivates absurdity, because absurdity is the perfect camouflage. Who will take seriously the man who claims his memory was stolen by entities that walked through walls? Who will believe the woman who birthed a child taken into light? Absurdity ensures silence, and silence preserves the covenant. But the treaties have deadlines. Every calendar cycle requires renewal. Every lunar and solar alignment is a contract checkpoint, a moment when offerings must be made. This is why waves of sightings surge at intervals, why abductions spike in clusters. These are not random phenomena. They are ritual harvests, orchestrated according to a cosmic calendar older than civilization. And the year approaches when the final clause is due, the clause no ruler can refuse, integration. No longer will the harvest be clandestine, hidden in shadows. The phenomenon prepares to step openly into the theater of human society, to present itself as savior, overseer, liberator, even God. The scripts are already written, the narratives rehearsed, the priests of media preparing the stage. And when that day comes, it will not be called invasion, but unveiling, not conquest, but communion. And humanity, exhausted by lies, will kneel in gratitude, offering itself not by force, but by consent. But there are cracks in the covenant. Whistleblowers leak fragments. Mystics dream of resistance. Hybrids hesitate in laboratories. And above all, the soul resists. For the soul cannot be owned, cannot be engineered, cannot be harvested without consent. And that consent, though buried beneath propaganda and terror, can be withdrawn. A single human who remembers their sovereignty can defy the harvest. And if enough remember, the phenomenon collapses, its crafts dissolve like mirages, its priests left powerless. For the true invasion is not of Earth by aliens, but of consciousness by illusion. And the counter-ritual is not weaponry, but memory, not resistance by violence, but by awakening. To see the sky not as a ceiling of power, but as a mirror of self, is to shatter the cage. The ancestral machines of the sky. Beneath the black expanse of the modern night, where city lights flicker like the weak pulse of a dying star, humanity has long imagined itself sovereign, ruler of earth and sky. Yet above, in the spaces between the clouds and the edges of perception, something older than kings, older than gods, stirs with deliberate patience, moving not with engines, but with intent, not with flight, but with consciousness. And the crafts that hum and vanish across the globe are not machines at all, but living. Sigils, vessels of a covenant older than history. Instruments of an agenda written into the resonance of flesh and thought. It began in silence, in the forgotten corridors of desert bases, in the shadows of hangars where men who called themselves generals trembled before a presence that did not speak, but pressed itself into the mind, shaping thought as easily as clay. And the Roswell incident was not a crash, but an arrival, a disclosure encoded in fragments of alloy that sang when touched, carrying messages not of language, but of frequency, teaching those who handled them that intelligence is not a thing, but a condition, a field, a pressure upon awareness. And those who would call themselves stewards of humanity immediately recognized both gift and threat, yet understood neither, and thus were drawn into the first covenant. An exchange of obedience for technology, silence for survival. Bloodlines offered up in ritual harvest so that the visitors might study and the shepherds might be elevated in return. And this covenant has never been broken, only layered, extended, hidden under decades of projects with code names meant to soothe, from Signed a Grudge to Blue Book to the shadowed councils of Majestic 12, where 12 men were entrusted with the secrets of the sky, each a priest in a terrestrial lodge, each a witness to the unnameable, each a participant in rites that would make an ancient Babylonian acolyte blush. For the beings who arrived are not foreign in the sense of distant, but foreign in the sense of absolute, alien to human morality, alien to linear time, alien to mortality itself. And their vessels, discs, triangles, orbs, move without regard to aerodynamics, responding not to gravity, but to attention, to fear, to awe, to the silent vibrations of human consciousness. And thus every sighting is a ritual, every encounter sacrament, and humans unwittingly are both altar and offering. And in laboratories hidden beneath salt flats, mesas and mountain ranges, the hybrids are bred, each one a living covenant, designed to walk between dimensions, designed to feel the pulse of control without rebellion, designed to be obedient. Yet in some of these children there flickers the forbidden spark, the residue of autonomy. And those sparks are dangerous because they carry memory of what humanity once was: free, radiant, sovereign, unchained. And when even a single spark ignites, it threatens the harvest, threatens the covenant, threatens the very architecture of obedience that has been constructed in the shadows. And above the surface, the black triangles glide silently over cities, nuclear sites, and military installations, instruments not of surveillance alone, but of calculation, measuring emotional resonance, mapping fear and hope, cataloging patterns of belief. For the visitors are mathematicians of destiny, And humans are variables, and nothing is left to chance. And when the abductee wakes with missing hours, with scars invisible to the eye, but luminous in the hidden spectrum, it is not cruelty, but pedagogy, not terror, but initiation, a teaching in geometry of soul and frequency. And those who recover fragments of memory are whispered to by dreamlike figures, their lips moving words that are not words, carrying instructions that cannot be ignored. And in that moment, the abductee becomes both witness and participant, subject and amplifier, for the phenomenon thrives not on secrecy alone, but on engagement, on attention, on the oscillation between belief and doubt. And thus society is groomed to nourish it by ridicule, by fascination, by obsession. And the men in black are not agents of government, but avatars of the covenant, agents of absurdity, confusion, and control, sent to keep the herd tethered, to blur the line between reality and hallucination. Because absurdity generates compliance, and compliance preserves the harvest. And in the early days of the Cold War, these rituals escalated, for treaties were negotiated not with signatures on paper, but with alignments in the sky, with appearances timed to lunar cycles, solar eclipses, and planetary conjunctions, each moment serving as a checkpoint, a renewal of promises, a tithe of awareness, and nations obeyed, trading technology, territory, and loyalty in a system whose rules were invisible, yet absolute. And the military did not understand the entities they bargained with, nor did the scientists who cataloged lights, orbs, and radar anomalies. For to study the phenomenon empirically is to miss the point. The crafts are not physical alone, but symbolic, vessels of instruction, mirrors of the forgotten self, and the humans who gaze upward, who observe, who track, are themselves incorporated into the design, their consciousness feeding the motion, their attention powering the appearance, their belief shaping the geometry. And in this way the sky becomes a theater, the lights a play, and every witness, both audience and actor, and the hybrids in their underground sanctuaries learn to mimic humanity. Their eyes too large because they see the threads of existence. Their emotions blunted because feeling is rebellion. Their presence a measure of control. Yet sometimes they hesitate. Flickers of empathy rise within them. And those flickers are lethal to the covenant, for they carry the possibility of sabotage, of choice, of refusal. And above, the crafts respond, moving not along trajectories but along frequencies, warping space, bending light, appearing and disappearing as if the rules of the cosmos themselves bend to their will. And the covenant is reinforced not only by force but by ritualized deception, by staged disclosures, by propaganda disguised as media, by myths fed to the masses, by absurd sightings that make the serious scholar tremble in confusion. For uncertainty is the perfect cage, and in the cage the shepherds learn to love the leash, believing it comfort. And when the final alignment approaches, the moment of integration, the point where the covenant shifts from clandestine to manifest, the world will witness not an invasion, but a presentation, and the harvest will be both literal and symbolic. The beings will step into society, not as conquerors, but as benefactors, and humanity will kneel willingly, exhausted by decades of lies and ritualized awe, and yet in the hidden pockets of memory, in the sparks of the hybrids, in the few who remember the sovereignty of self, there lies a counter-ritual, a refusal, a chance to break the chain, to resist without force, to reclaim the breath and the mind, to see the sky not as a ceiling, but as a mirror of choice. And those who awaken will realize that the crafts, the treaties, the hybrids, the men in black, the alignments, the rituals, the calendars, all of it exists to harvest attention, obedience, and fear. And that attention and obedience and fear can be withdrawn. And in that withdrawal lies the secret of liberation, the hidden clause in the covenant, the loophole older than law, older than kings, older than the first stars, and the watchers who have always calculated and measured, who have always harvested, know that one spark of remembered sovereignty, multiplied, can unravel everything, can turn the sky into a battlefield where the harvesters themselves are at risk, can make the vehicles vanish as illusions, can render the rituals impotent, can shatter the sacred geometry of control. And this is why secrecy is enforced, why ridicule is engineered, why the calendars are encoded, why abductees are silenced, why the covenant persists, and it will not persist forever. For even the oldest machine, no matter how ancestral, cannot endure when the living consciousness it seeks to feed awakens, and the first transmission through the black sky carries with it the instructions, the warnings, the map to sovereignty, if only it is read, if only it is remembered. And so part 1 concludes, not with disclosure but with illumination, not with surrender but with awareness, with a faint, luminous possibility that humanity can look up and see the sky not as master, not as overlord, but as reflection, as teacher, as mirror, and that in this reflection lies both danger and the key to freedom. And the covenant waits, patient as stone, for the next move, for the next spark, for the next awakened mind willing to see, to remember, to breathe freely, to stand against the harvest, to reclaim the ancestral light from the machines of the sky. And now, as the night deepens and the black sky watches with patient eyes, remember this: the crafts are not finished, the covenant is not broken, and the harvest is only paused. Somewhere beneath the mesas, beneath the deserts, beneath the cities that sleep unaware, the hybrids breathe, the watchers calculate, and the countdown continues, silently ticking through lunar cycles and cosmic alignments. In the next chapter, the veil will lift further, and you will see not just the machines of the sky, but the hidden rules that govern them, the rituals that sustain them, and the sparks of rebellion that could shatter everything. Keep your senses sharp, for the covenant waits, and the sky itself will speak, but only to those ready to listen. Part 2 will reveal the covenant of the hidden sky, the rites, the archives, and the first cracks in the order they built. When the stars align, you will know why the watchers fear the awakening more than anything else.